The year is 2025. To many, it is just another number in the calendar, another page to be turned in humanity's long march through history. But to the ancient world, to mystics, astronomers, prophets, and secret brotherhoods, this year has always carried a whisper of significance. It is a number that reappears in forgotten manuscripts, in cycles of the stars, in crumbling prophecies written on parchment and stone. Why 2025? Why did civilizations separated by oceans and millennia seem to point toward this particular window of time? Is it coincidence, or a hidden knowledge passed down, guarded in temples and libraries, whispered in the initiation rites of secret orders? To understand why this single year carries such weight, we must first step back, far back, into the world before electricity, before modern science, when the night sky itself was a sacred text, and time was not counted in minutes, but in great cosmic cycles. The lure of prophecy, humanity has always yearned to know what comes next. From the earliest shamans reading omens in animal bones, to kings consulting oracles before marching in a battle, to medieval peasants awaiting the end of the world, prophecy has been our attempt to pierce the veil of time. Yet prophecy is not random. It is not scattered haphazardly across history. Again and again, certain dates emerge, like stars aligning on a celestial clock. Some dates have already passed, the year 1000, which medieval Christians feared as the end of days. The year 2012, when the Mayan long count was said to end. And now, looming before us, the year 2025. But unlike 2012, which mainstream culture mocked and dismissed, 2025 has remained largely unspoken, whispered in esoteric circles, referenced in obscure academic footnotes, hinted at in half-decoded manuscripts. To some, it marks catastrophe. To others, transformation. But all agree, it is not an ordinary year. The forgotten countdown imagined standing in an ancient temple, firelight flickering against carved stone walls. The priests speak of cycles, the great year, the age of men, the turning of the wheel. They do not measure time as we do. To them, every civilization, every empire, every human life is part of a larger rhythm, like breaths of the cosmos itself. What if those cycles all point to 2025 as the moment of shift? A hinge in the story of humanity? It sounds incredible, but this is precisely what we find when we dig deep enough. The Mayan calendar, the Vedic Yuga cycles of India, the Sibylline oracles of Rome, the prophecies of the Hopi people, even coded references in the pyramid texts of Egypt, each seems to converge upon this decade, this very year. Mainstream historians tell us these connections are coincidence. But if we know anything about the ancients, it is that they left very little to chance. Their monuments aligned with the stars. Their myths preserved astronomical cycles. Their calendars tracked not just seasons, but ages. To them, prophecy was not vague fortune-telling. It was astronomy, mathematics, and spirituality woven together. 2025 in the shadow of today, and so we arrive here, standing on the edge of the unknown. Look around. Our world is already in upheaval. Political structures strain under pressure. Technology advances at a pace even visionaries of the 20th century could not have imagined. The climate shifts. Wars break out. Rumors of war spread faster than ever before. Artificial intelligence rises from code, and humanity stands on the precipice of change. It is no wonder that the prophecies feel alive again. What if the ancients saw this moment? Not through superstition, but through cycles repeating across millennia. What if 2025 is not a date of doom, but a marker, a bell tolling in time, warning us that the age we knew is ending and a new one is beginning? The suppressed warnings, there is one more layer to this mystery. Again and again, throughout history, we find evidence of warnings erased, prophecies hidden, books burned. The Sibylline prophecies of Rome, kept in secret vaults, consulted only in times of crisis, then destroyed. The prophecies of the popes, locked away in the Vatican archives. Esoteric manuscripts burned in the fires of the Inquisition. Even today, obscure texts mentioning the mid-2020s circulate only in rare occult circles, seldom reaching the mainstream. Why? Why would warnings about a specific period in human history be silenced, erased, or ridiculed? Is it possible that institutions, political, religious, even scientific, fear what would happen if humanity took prophecy seriously? Or is it that such knowledge, if true, could change the course of history itself? Setting the stage, this documentary is not about predicting the end of the world. It is about uncovering the threads woven by ancient seers, astronomer priests, shamans, mystics, and secret societies. Threads that, when pulled together, form a startling picture that 2025 has been marked for centuries as a moment of reckoning. Over the next chapters, we will travel across continents and millennia. From the jungles of Central America, where Mayan stargazers charted the long count, to the deserts of Egypt where pyramids aligned with Orion. From the cryptic verses of the Sibyls to the thunderous myths of Norse Ragnarok. From the wisdom keepers of Native America to the monasteries of Tibet, from medieval scribes to modern prophets. Piece by piece, the puzzle will reveal itself. And as it does, we will confront the central question: what did the ancients know about 2025 that we have forgotten? The invitation as you listen: remember, prophecy is not always literal. It is symbolic, poetic, often cloaked in myth. But within those myths lie patterns. Patterns the ancients believed could predict the rise and fall of ages. And so, with open minds and patient curiosity, we begin. We open the scroll of time and step into the labyrinth of prophecy. At the heart of it lies one year, 2025, a year the ancients feared, revered, or awaited with hope. This is not just history. This is not just myth. This is a message carried across centuries, waiting for us, now. The question is, will we listen? Time. To us, it is divided into seconds, minutes, hours, days. A neat and predictable sequence measured by machines, ruled by atomic clocks. But for the ancients, time was not a straight line. It was a living cycle, a spiral, an eternal return of ages rising, peaking, collapsing, and renewing. And through those cycles, they built calendars, not merely to mark the seasons for harvest or planting, but to align humanity with cosmic rhythms. These calendars were sacred, guiding kings, priests, and entire civilizations. Hidden within them was something deeper, a countdown, a warning, a marker pointing to our era and to the year we now call 2025. The Mayan long count let us begin in Central America, deep in the jungles of the Yucatan, where the Maya civilization flourished. The Maya were master astronomers, capable of calculating planetary cycles with a precision modern scientists still marvel at. Their famous long count calendar did not simply track years. It tracked vast cycles spanning thousands of years, cycles they called backtons. According to Mayan cosmology, we are living in the fifth age of the sun. Each age ends in catastrophe, by flood, fire, earthquake, or cosmic upheaval. The long count famously culminated in December 2012, a date that captured global imagination. Mainstream media mocked it as the end of the world that never happened. But what many forget, or never knew, is that the Mayan system did not end in 2012. That date marked the close of the 13th Bacton and the opening of the 14th. In some Mayan interpretations, the true transition would not manifest instantly, but over a 13-year cycle, culminating around 2025. So while the world laughed off 2012, Maya elders quietly spoke of a longer transformation, a turbulent birth process leading into a new cosmic dawn. The Aztec sunstone, not far from the Mayans, the Aztecs carved their monumental sunstone, often miscalled a calendar stone. In its concentric rings, gods have passed. Ages are shown destroyed, while the fifth sun, our current era, awaits its own demise. The Aztecs spoke of 5 suns, each destroyed by cosmic forces. Earthquakes, floods, fiery rain. The fifth sun, the age we inhabit, was prophesied to end in upheaval and rebirth. Scholars debate the exact timing, but intriguingly, some interpretations place this collapse in the early to mid-21st century. Once again, we encounter a countdown pointing not to the distant future, but to our lifetime. Babylonian star cycles, far older still, are the astronomer priests of Babylon, who watched the heavens with tireless devotion. They tracked eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and the mysterious cycle of precession. To them, time was not measured in decades, but in the rise and fall of entire world ages. Babylonian scholars spoke of the Saros cycle, a rhythm of eclipses repeating every 18 years. They noticed that great disasters and regime changes coincided with certain eclipse series. When modern researchers overlay these cycles onto today, they too find convergences around the mid-2020s. Even more astonishing, fragments of cuneiform tablets hint that Babylonian kings were warned of a dark turning after the passing of 70 generations, a calculation some esoteric historians align with the current decade. India and the Yugas in India. The Vedic tradition speaks of Yugas, vast ages of the world. Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, the dark age we now inhabit. The Kali Yuga is described as a time of moral decay, technological corruption, spiritual blindness. Sound familiar? But Hindu cosmology does not stop there. It describes transitions, sandhis, where one age dissolves into the next. Some traditions place the end of the Kali Yuga thousands of years in the future. Yet others, especially esoteric schools influenced by Sri Yukswar and later mystics, suggest that the turning point of the cycle is now. According to their recalculations, humanity enters a dramatic transitional period around 2025, a moment when the grip of darkness begins to loosen. China's mandate of heaven across the world. In China, dynasties rose and fell under the concept of the mandate of heaven. When rulers grew corrupt, the cosmos itself withdrew its blessing. Famines, floods, rebellions. These were not random, but signs that the cycle of time demanded renewal. Ancient Chinese cyclical calendars, such as the sexagenary cycle of 60 years, were tied to cosmic order. Astrological charts suggest that the early to mid-2020s mark a dangerous transition point when heaven's mandate shifts once again. A new cycle is due, and with it upheaval. The convergence of calendars here is where the mystery deepens. Each of these civilizations, Maya, Aztec, Babylonian, Vedic, Chinese, developed independently, separated by oceans and centuries. Yet their calendars share common elements. Time is cyclical, not linear. Each cycle ends in collapse and renewal. Humanity lives in a dark or decaying age just before transition. The transition point is not far off, but imminent. When modern researchers map these cycles onto our era, a convergence emerges. Not exact to the day or month, but clustered around this decade, with 2025 at its center. Could it really be coincidence that so many calendars, tracking such different cosmic patterns, converge here? Or is this the hidden countdown the ancients tried to leave us? Suppression and skepticism, of course. Mainstream historians dismiss these ideas. They tell us ancient calendars were primitive attempts to mark agricultural seasons. They insist correlations with modern years are forced, exaggerated, or outright wrong. And yet, the precision of Mayan astronomy rivals our own. Babylonian eclipse predictions remain accurate today. The Indian Yuga cycles align eerily with historical rises and collapses of empires. These are not primitive systems. They were advanced, deliberate, and deeply tied to cosmic observation. If these calendars were meant as warnings, would it not make sense that today's institutions would prefer us not to take them seriously? After all, how do you govern a society if the people believe an age is about to end? A cosmic clock, imagine, then, that all of human history is not random progress, but the ticking of a cosmic clock. Each empire, each invention, each war is but a second hand moving toward a destined hour. And that hour, according to so many calendars, is striking now. In 2025, this is not prophecy in the sense of crystal balls or fortune tellers. It is prophecy in the sense of astronomy, mathematics, and memory, humanity's oldest science. The ancients believed they had measured the heartbeat of the cosmos, and now the rhythm points toward us. The next step we have seen the calendars, the frameworks of time itself. But calendars are only the skeleton. To flesh out the mystery, we must look deeper into the stories, the oracles, and the myths that clothe these cycles in vivid imagery. And so, in the next chapter, we journey to Egypt, where prophecy was written not just in words, but in the stars. There, in the temples of the Nile, priests aligned their monuments with Orion and Sirius, timing humanity's fate to the heavens themselves. The sands of Egypt have always whispered secrets. Beneath the blazing sun, amid colossal monuments and silent tombs, lies a civilization obsessed with eternity and the stars. The Egyptians did not see the sky as an empty void, but as the realm of gods, cycles, and destiny. To them, prophecy was not an abstract concept, but a science of alignment, of monuments, constellations, and sacred numbers. And when we follow their alignments carefully, something strange emerges, a suggestion that the mid-2020s were marked as a time of great change. The oldest sacred texts of Egypt, carved into the walls of pyramids and temples, spoke of cosmic order, of the eternal struggle between light and chaos. Known as the Pyramid Texts, these inscriptions preserve the vision of priests who believed that human destiny was written in the heavens. They told of a cycle that repeats, a cosmic rhythm where the kingdom of the gods interacts with the realm of men. To the average person, these might seem like myths, but to the priesthood of Heliopolis and Memphis, they were coded astronomy, a system for predicting ages. Within their verses were references to the rebirth of worlds, to times when the balance of Ma'at, the universal order, would be tested and humanity forced to pass through a trial of fire or flood. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. For centuries, it has inspired speculation. Mainstream Egyptology insists it was merely a tomb, but countless researchers have noticed its design is far more advanced than required for a burial chamber. The pyramid's shafts point to Orion and Sirius, constellations tied to Osiris and Isis, the god and goddess of resurrection and cosmic renewal. When the rising of Sirius coincided with the flooding of the Nile, the Egyptians saw it as the pulse of the cosmos guiding their civilization. But more than that, they believed such alignments could foretell epochs of transformation. Some fringe researchers have argued that encoded within the pyramid's dimensions are numbers pointing to key dates, and intriguingly, calculations based on pyramid inches and precessional cycles draw attention to the 21st century, particularly the years around 2025. For the Egyptians, prophecy was inseparable from astronomy. The stars were the eternal markers of fate. Every temple, every monument, was an astronomical instrument designed to remind humanity of its place in the cosmic cycle. At Karnak, the massive temple complex aligned perfectly with the solstices. At Abu Simbel, the sun would pierce the inner sanctum on exact days of the year, illuminating statues of the gods. These are not accidents. They were carefully constructed calendars carved in stone, cosmic clocks ticking toward future events. And if we accept that the ancients viewed time as cyclical, then it follows that the alignments we now see in the heavens were understood long ago and tied to moments of profound change. The Egyptian priesthood guarded knowledge jealously. They were the keepers of records stretching back, according to their own claims, not merely centuries but thousands of years. Herodotus, the Greek historian, was told by priests that their records extended 11,000 years into the past, far beyond what modern historians are willing to accept. Or these records tracking dynasties, yes, but also the stars, the slow drift of the heavens known today as the precession of the equinoxes. Precession is the 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis, shifting the backdrop of constellations over ages. Many scholars argue that the Egyptians, like later Greeks, were aware of this phenomenon. And if they tracked precession, They could also forecast turning points within it. Some modern researchers believe that their monuments encode not only past alignments, but warnings of future ones, with our present century marked as a threshold moment. Even Egyptian mythology hints at cycles of destruction and renewal. The tale of the sun god Ra battling the serpent Apophis every night is more than a myth. It is a story of order versus chaos, endlessly repeating, with moments when chaos grows so strong it nearly swallows creation. The prophecy embedded in such myths is that one day, chaos will overwhelm the order of the world, forcing a new dawn. Osiris, god of resurrection, symbolized this hope. Death followed by rebirth, darkness followed by light. In esoteric traditions that trace their roots back to Egypt, Osiris's resurrection was not merely about individuals, but about entire ages of humanity. Hidden manuscripts from later periods give further clues. The so-called Hermetic texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, speak of a time when Egypt itself would fall silent, when its temples would crumble and its wisdom be hidden. These writings describe a renewal of the world, a great cosmic turning, after which truth would return. Some interpretations place this renewal in a distant future, but occult schools in the 19th and 20th centuries, who claimed secret access to Egyptian mysteries, insisted that the prophecy pointed to the early 21st century. For them, the great unveiling was to occur around 2025, when the world would enter a stage of both chaos and awakening. One cannot ignore the role of secret societies in keeping Egyptian prophecy alive. The Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and Hermetic orders all drew heavily on Egyptian symbolism, claiming to inherit the knowledge of the priesthood. Within their writings, hints surfaced that the Great Pyramid was a message for future generations, a stone calendar counting down to our time. Skeptics dismiss these as fantasies. Yet the persistence of the 2020s as a symbolic turning point in esoteric teachings is difficult to overlook. If so many groups across centuries pointed to this decade, it begs the question, do they all trace their knowledge back to an original Egyptian prophecy? What makes Egypt so important in this narrative is its unique ability to merge myth and science. To the Egyptians, the stars were gods, the gods were time, and time was prophecy. When we stand before the Great Pyramid, when we gaze at the carvings of Osiris and Isis, when we trace the alignment of temples with the solstices, we are not simply looking at relics. We are looking at a map of cycles, a coded warning left by a civilization that believed it was their duty to preserve the memory of past cataclysms so that future generations might be ready. And so, when the ancients of Egypt gazed into the heavens and calculated the rise and fall of ages, they marked certain thresholds with grave importance. Whether encoded in the pyramid shafts pointing to Orion, or in the mythology of resurrection, or in the later Hermetic texts predicting a cosmic renewal, the message is the same. The age will turn, and when it does, humanity must choose whether to collapse into chaos or rise into renewal. Many modern interpreters argue that the Egyptian clock, like those of the Maya and Babylonians, points directly to our century, and in particular, the years around 2025. If that is true, then perhaps the sands of Egypt are not silent at all. Perhaps they are still whispering, warning, and guiding. And as we leave the Nile and follow the trail of prophecy westward, we arrive at another great tradition of prediction, the Sibylline oracles of Rome, whose mysterious verses speak of empires collapsing, fire from the sky, and the dawn of a new world. And as we shall see, they too seem to circle this very era, drawing the noose of mystery ever tighter around the year 2025. In the heart of the Roman Empire, amid the grandeur of temples, senate halls, and bustling markets, a hidden voice guided the destiny of emperors. These were not generals or senators, but prophets, enigmatic women known as the Sibyls. Their words, collected in a set of mysterious scrolls, came to be known as the Sibylline books, and for centuries they were treated as one of Rome's greatest treasures. Not jewels, not gold, but prophecy itself. To the Romans, These verses were a direct channel to the divine, warnings about disasters, guidance on wars, and predictions of cosmic upheavals. Today, what remains of their verses hints at a deeper pattern, one that appears to stretch across centuries and eerily converge upon our own time, upon the shadowed year of 2025. According to legend, the Sibylline books were first offered to King Tarquin the Proud, the last monarch of Rome, by a mysterious old woman. She carried 9 scrolls filled with prophecy and demanded an outrageous price for them. When Tarquin laughed and refused, she burned 3 of the scrolls in front of him and demanded the same price for the 6 remaining. Again, he refused, and again she burned 3 more. At last, when only 3 scrolls remained, Tarquin, shaken by her persistence, paid the price and preserved them. Those 3 books were locked away in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, consulted only in moments of crisis. The message of this legend is clear. Prophecy is not easily bought, and what is lost can never be recovered. For centuries, whenever plagues struck Rome, whenever famine spread or enemies threatened, the Senate would turn to the keepers of these books, the priests of Apollo. The verses were cryptic, often poetic riddles that needed interpretation. They were not meant for ordinary citizens. Only the elite had access. This secrecy alone should make us wonder, what knowledge did they guard so carefully? And why was it so dangerous that, when Christianity rose to power, these texts were eventually destroyed? Fragments survive, however, scattered in the writings of church fathers and copied by scribes who could not bear to let them vanish completely. In these fragments, we find astonishing predictions. There are warnings of fire raining from the sky, of nations falling in cycles, of a time when Rome itself would collapse and be reborn in another form. Some verses speak of the last age, when the earth trembles and a new kingdom arises, ruled not by emperors but by divine will. Scholars debate whether these verses were genuine prophecies or retroactive writings designed to make sense of past events. Yet the rhythm of the text, the repeated emphasis on ages ending and beginning, feels strikingly similar to the cyclical worldviews of Egypt, Babylon, and the Maya. More intriguing still, the Sibylline prophecies often seem to point not to a single apocalypse, but to recurring thresholds in history, moments when an old order collapses and a new one begins. This echoes what we see across civilizations. Time as a series of collapses and renewals, a spiral rather than a straight line. The Sibyls warned that such thresholds would come with signs in the heavens, comets, eclipses, alignments. And here, once again, the mid-2020s emerge as a time when celestial phenomena converge in ways the ancients would not have ignored. A series of eclipses and planetary alignments in 2024 and 2025 may not alarm modern astronomers, but to a Roman augur or Sibyl, such signs would have screamed of cosmic change. The story of the Sibyls themselves adds to the aura of mystery. They were said to be scattered across the ancient world. The Cumaean Sibyl in Italy, the Delphic Sibyl in Greece, the Libyan Sibyl in North Africa, and others as far as Asia Minor. Each spoke in riddles, often in trances, their words flowing like poetry from another realm. The Romans believed these voices were connected, threads of a single divine source. Early Christians, too, took the Sibyls seriously. In fact, medieval cathedrals often depicted Sibyls alongside prophets of the Bible, suggesting that their words were part of a universal prophetic tradition. Michelangelo even painted them on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, giving them equal weight with Isaiah and Ezekiel. If their visions were so revered, why were they ultimately buried in silence? Some scholars argue that the suppression of the Sibylline books was deliberate. When Christianity became the dominant power, the existence of alternative prophecy, especially one that spoke of cycles and cosmic ages, was seen as dangerous. A worldview that predicted the fall of empires and the renewal of ages conflicted with the idea of a single, linear divine plan. And so, the texts were destroyed in the 5th century. What little survived was filtered, edited, and reinterpreted. But here is where the conspiracy begins. What if those destroyed scrolls contained dates, cycles, even astronomical markers that pointed precisely to times like our own. If the ancients had measured the rise and fall of ages, if they had indeed warned of thresholds, could it be that the scrolls once contained a countdown, ending in our century? Throughout history, echoes of Sibylline prophecy have resurfaced in strange ways. During the Renaissance, scholars obsessed with rediscovering lost wisdom searched for fragments of the Sibyls. Some claim to see in their words predictions of great upheavals in Europe, revolutions, and even world wars. In the 19th century, occult societies studied these prophecies alongside Egyptian and Hebrew texts, convinced that they all pointed to a shared timeline. Several of these groups, Rosicrucians, early Freemasons, and later mystic orders, spoke in hushed tones of the year 2025 as a turning point, though they rarely gave details. It is almost as if a faint echo of the lost scrolls continued to ripple through secret channels, resurfacing century after century. There is also the strange connection between the Sibylline prophecies and the idea of Rome itself as an eternal empire. The verses often warned of Rome's destruction, but also of its rebirth in new forms. Some took this to mean the Holy Roman Empire. Others saw it fulfilled in the rise of modern Europe, or even America, often called a New Rome. If that is true, then the cycle of collapse and renewal may not be limited to ancient history. It may apply to our world today, where global empires, political, economic, technological, stand on the edge of transformation. What would the Sibyls say of the 21st century, of a world linked by invisible networks, of power concentrated in digital empires rather than marble palaces? Perhaps they would see the same old cycle repeating, the arrogance of power leading to collapse, followed by renewal. And perhaps they would name our decade as the threshold moment. What makes the Sibylline tradition so haunting is the sense of knowledge lost, deliberately erased, yet too powerful to vanish completely. Fragments, whispers, and echoes remain, enough to make us wonder whether those ancient scrolls carried warnings meant for us. The burning of the books, the secrecy of the priests, the selective survival of verses, all of it feels like a pattern of suppression. Knowledge guarded, then hidden, then destroyed. And yet, somehow, it always finds a way back into human memory. As we move deeper into this journey of prophecy, we must ask, if Rome's greatest treasure was not its legions or its architecture, but a set of prophetic books, then what does it mean that those books pointed again and again to cycles of collapse and renewal? And if those cycles align with our own time, then perhaps the Sibyls did not speak only to emperors of old, but to us as well. For in their cryptic verses lies a warning that no empire, no civilization, no age lasts forever. Every power must face its ending, and with it, the dawn of something new. And so the thread continues. From Egypt to Rome, from the stars to the scrolls, prophecy whispers of cycles converging. But if Egypt saw destiny in Orion and Rome heard it in the verses of Sibyls, the northern tribes of Europe preserved it in another form entirely. The saga of Ragnarok, the end of the gods, and the rebirth of the world. And in their myths, too, we find shadows of our own age and of the year 2025. In the frozen north, where the long nights were lit only by fire and the aurora borealis shimmered across the sky, another vision of prophecy took shape. Among the Norse peoples, time was not endless progress, but a cycle that began with creation and wood, end in fire, ice, and rebirth. They called it Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. Unlike the linear endings feared by other traditions, Ragnarok was a cataclysm followed by renewal, the destruction of one world and the dawn of another. To the Norse, this was not a distant myth. It was a certainty woven into the runes, sung by skalds, and carved into memory. And when we examine this myth through the lens of cycles, echoes, and hidden calendars, it becomes clear that the story of Ragnarok may not belong only to the past, but to the age we are entering now, an age converging on 2025. The Eddas, the great collections of Norse myth recorded in Iceland centuries after the Viking Age, tell of the signs that would precede Ragnarok. They speak of the Fimbul winter, a winter of 3 years with no summer between. They speak of the wolf Fenrir breaking free of his chains, of the Midgard serpent rising from the sea, of the sun and moon being devoured, of the heavens shaking and the earth cracking. Then comes the great battle, gods and giants locked in combat, the world consumed in flames, and finally the sea swallowing the land. But from this devastation, a green earth rises anew, and 2 human survivors repopulate the world. On the surface, these are stories. Yet even the medieval scribes who recorded them hinted at deeper meanings. The runes, the Norse alphabet that was also a system of divination, suggested that these myths were never just about the distant future, but about repeating patterns of destruction and renewal. Each rune was more than a letter. It was a symbol of fate. Odin himself, the Allfather, was said to have sacrificed himself upon the world tree Yggdrasil to gain knowledge of the runes. In other words, the runes were tools of prophecy, a way of reading the cosmic order. If the runes encoded cycles, then Ragnarok was not just a single apocalypse. It was the archetype of collapse and rebirth, a cycle destined to repeat. Some scholars have noticed that the Norse myths describe not merely metaphysical events, but natural phenomena. The Fimbul winter could be the memory of a volcanic winter, perhaps triggered by eruptions like that of 536 AD, which plunged much of the world into cold and famine. The serpent rising from the sea may reflect tsunamis or floods. The devouring of the sun and moon could correspond to eclipses or even to the cycles of solar activity. In this way, Ragnarok resembles the flood myths, fire myths, and cosmic renewal myths found across the world. It is another culture's way of encoding the cycles of nature, cycles that could be measured, predicted, and tied to cosmic alignments. If we place Ragnarok into this framework, the question arises, when is the next cycle due? Some esoteric interpreters of Norse myth argue that the calendar of Ragnarok aligns with astronomical cycles like precession, eclipses, and solar activity. They point out that the myths describe the shaking of Yggdrasil, the world tree, a symbolic representation of the axis of the world. Today we know that Earth's axis wobbles slowly over a 26,000-year cycle, shifting the backdrop of the stars. To the Norse, living close to the Arctic Circle, the heavens were a canvas of constant motion. Could they have encoded in their myths a warning about the times when cosmic cycles would bring upheaval? If so, the next great threshold appears to coincide with the early 21st century, specifically the years around 2025, when unusual celestial alignments once again dominate the skies. The Norse also placed great importance on seers, known as vulvas, women who entered trance states to chant visions of the future. The most famous of these prophecies is the Voluspa, the prophecy of the seeress, preserved in the Poetic Edda. In it, the vulva describes the birth of the world, its destruction in Ragnarok, and its renewal. She warns of the signs: brothers killing brothers, families torn apart, wars spreading, wolves devouring the sun, stars vanishing from the sky. The language is poetic, but strikingly relevant to our own world. Families divided, civil strife, ecological collapse, strange signs in the sky. These could easily describe the turmoil of the 21st century. And when the vulva speaks of a new age arising from the ashes, it is hard not to wonder if she was speaking not of an unreachable future, but of the times we now approach. For centuries, Norse prophecy was dismissed as legend. In the modern age, its imagery has resurfaced again and again. During World War II, Nazi Germany, obsessed with myth and prophecy, twisted the Ragnarok legend to fit its apocalyptic worldview. In the Cold War, with the looming threat of nuclear annihilation, many writers compared the idea of mutual destruction to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods in a fiery global battle. And today, with climate change, polar ice melting, and geopolitical tensions rising, the Norse vision of fire and ice feels eerily alive. The Fimbul winter could easily be read as the climate disruptions of our age, with extremes of heat and cold, drought and flood, disrupting civilizations. The wolf finner breaking free could symbolize technologies, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or weapons, once chained but now unleashed. Runic studies add another dimension. Some modern esotericists claim that the runic calendar, when mapped onto modern years, highlights key thresholds around the 21st century. They argue that the rune sequence reflects ages of human development, and that by 2025, we enter the rune of Dagas, the rune of transformation, representing the dawn breaking after darkness. If true, this would mean that Ragnarok is not only about collapse, but about the transformation that follows, perfectly aligning with the idea of 2025 as a turning point. It is also worth noting that the Norse saw themselves as part of a larger cosmic story, one that would continue beyond the gods. Unlike the Christian apocalypse, which ends with final judgment, Ragnarok ends with renewal. The gods themselves die, but the world continues, renewed and repopulate. This vision resonates strongly with other traditions that speak of cycles: the Maya, the Hindus, the Egyptians. Each age ends violently, but a new age rises. The Norse version simply clothed this cycle in the language of wolves, serpents, and fiery battles. What makes Ragnarok particularly relevant to us is its universality. It does not describe only one event in the distant future. It is a myth that can be applied again and again to any age of collapse. And if we are indeed standing at the edge of a global collapse, whether through climate, technology, or politics, then we are living through our own Ragnarok. The signs are here: wars, ecological upheaval, strange skies, brothers divided. The seeress's prophecy feels less like ancient poetry and more like a mirror held up to our world. As we piece together this global puzzle of prophecy, the Norse contribution adds a chilling but hopeful voice. Yes, collapse is inevitable, they say. Yes, the age will end in fire and chaos. But from that fire comes renewal. A green earth will rise, and humanity will begin again. The runes, the myths, the seeress's chant, they all point to cycles, and those cycles seem to converge now, in our time. Perhaps this is why so many esoteric traditions, drawing on Norse symbols, place emphasis on the 2020s as the twilight of the old world and the dawn of the new. And so, the fire of Ragnarok joins the star wisdom of Egypt and the scrolls of Rome. Different lands, different languages, but the same underlying theme: collapse, renewal, and the turning of ages. The ancients warned us through myth, prophecy, and symbol. And now, as we move eastward once more into the high mountains of India and Tibet, we find yet another prophetic system, one that speaks of the Kali Yuga, the dark age we inhabit, and the transition that may already be upon us. High in the temples of India, under the shadow of the Himalayas, a different vision of time has been preserved, one far more vast than the cycles of Egypt, Rome, or the Norse. For in the East, the sages did not measure time in centuries or millennia, but in cosmic ages spanning thousands upon thousands of years. According to Hindu philosophy, humanity moves through 4 great cycles, known as the Yugas: Satya Yuga, the age of truth; Treta Yuga, the age of diminishing virtue; Dvapara Yuga, the age of confusion; and finally Kali Yuga, the dark age of ignorance, corruption, and decay. It is said that at the end of Kali Yuga, the world undergoes renewal, and the golden age begins again. If the Sibyls spoke of thresholds, and the Norse told of Ragnarok, the Eastern mystics painted the grandest vision of all, a cycle that governs not just nations or empires, but the very destiny of humanity itself. What makes the Kali Yuga particularly relevant is that, by nearly every calculation, we are living within it now. The ancient texts describe it as a time when rulers are corrupt, when truth is obscured, when humanity forgets its higher nature, and when materialism dominates over spirit. Families are divided, the environment is ravaged, and the world seems to spin out of balance. These descriptions, written thousands of years ago, sound uncannily like the conditions of our modern age. From political corruption to ecological destruction, from technological obsession to social fragmentation. The Kali Yuga seems less like a distant prophecy and more like a mirror reflecting our current world. But the mystery deepens. Some interpretations of Hindu chronology suggest that Kali Yuga lasts for 432,000 years, of which only a few thousand have passed. By this measure, we are still at the very beginning of the age, with countless centuries ahead. Yet alternative traditions within India, as well as Tibetan and theosophical interpretations, tell a different story. They argue that the ancient numbers are symbolic, not literal, and that the yugas move on smaller fractal cycles. By this reasoning, Kali Yuga is not 432,000 years long, but rather a much shorter span that repeats in patterns. If that is true, then our own era may represent the climax of a cycle, with the threshold of renewal approaching much sooner than mainstream Hinduism suggests. This is where 2025 enters the conversation. In certain circles of Indian and Tibetan prophecy, the mid-2020s are seen as a turning point. Some yogic lineages, drawing on hidden calculations from the Puranas, claim that a great shift will occur around this time, a shift not necessarily of the entire world at once, but of consciousness. Theosophical writings from the 19th and 20th centuries, which drew heavily on Hindu and Buddhist sources, echo this idea. Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, wrote of cycles within cycles, arguing that humanity moves through smaller yugas within the greater framework. Later disciples suggested that the years around 2025 would mark the end of one cycle of darkness and the first stirrings of a new dawn. In Tibet, prophecies preserved in monasteries speak of a coming age of upheaval and renewal. The Kalachakra Tantra, one of the most esoteric Buddhist teachings, describes cycles of time that mirror the yugas, and it too points to an eventual confrontation between forces of darkness and the emergence of a golden age. Some Tibetan lamas have even stated openly that the early 21st century marks a critical threshold for humanity, a time when old structures collapse and new possibilities arise. To them, the year 2025 is not just a number. It is the crest of a wave in the great ocean of cycles. Descriptions of the end of Kali Yuga are chilling in their accuracy. The Vishnu Purana, one of the ancient Hindu texts, describes a time when wealth alone will confer rank, law and justice will be determined by power, and deceit will be the foundation of success. It describes an age when people are obsessed with pleasure, when spiritual knowledge is forgotten, when nations collapse into war. Yet the text also promises that, when the darkness reaches its peak, a new incarnation of Vishnu, the Kalki avatar, will appear, riding upon a white horse, to destroy the wicked and restore righteousness. Whether taken literally or symbolically, this image of a savior at the end of the Dark Age is remarkably similar to messianic traditions across the world, from the return of Christ in Christianity to the Mahdi in Islam to Maitreya in Buddhism. Could all of these figures be symbols of the same archetype, the rebirth of light after the age of darkness? Another fascinating aspect of the Yuga cycles is their connection to astronomy. Some researchers argue that the Yugas are linked to the precessional cycle of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. According to this theory, the Golden Age aligns with times when Earth's orientation brings it closer to a kind of cosmic spring, and the Dark Age aligns with times of cosmic winter. If this is true, then the Yugas may not be purely symbolic. They may be reflections of real cosmic rhythms that affect human consciousness. And if so, then the question becomes, where are we now in this vast cycle? Intriguingly, several independent researchers place the transition point near the years we are now entering, with 2025 emerging as a symbolic moment when the cycle begins to turn. In the West, the theosophical tradition picked up on this idea and spread it into esoteric circles. Alice Bailey, one of the major voices of the theosophical movement in the 20th century, wrote explicitly of 2025 as a year of great importance, when a new cycle of spiritual revelation would begin. She claimed that hidden masters of wisdom had chosen this year as a time when humanity would be tested and when new opportunities for evolution would open. Her followers believed that by 2025, the seeds of a new world order, not political in the conventional sense, but spiritual and cultural, would be planted. Whether one accepts these claims or not, it is striking that multiple traditions, separated by continents and centuries, point to the same period. Even modern spiritual teachers in India speak of the cycle turning. Some gurus describe our time as the very end of Kali Yuga, when the age of darkness is at its worst but also closest to renewal. They compare it to the darkest moment of night, just before dawn. The significance of 2025 in this context is not that the world will suddenly transform overnight, but that the great pendulum of history will begin its slow swing back toward light. Just as a seed germinates in the soil long before it sprouts above ground, the renewal of the yugas begins invisibly, deep in consciousness, before it manifests in the outer world. What makes these prophecies so compelling is not only their symbolic resonance, but their practical parallels. We live in a time of corruption, ecological crisis, technological upheaval, and social division, exactly as the text described. And yet, we also live in a time of awakening, with ancient knowledge resurfacing, meditation and yoga spreading worldwide, and a growing awareness of humanity's interconnectedness. Could it be that we are witnessing both the peak of Kali Yuga and the first hints of its dissolution? Could the turmoil of our age be the labor pains of a new cycle? If so, then the year 2025 may be remembered not for a single apocalyptic event, but for the subtle turning of a cosmic wheel, the shift from descent into darkness to the slow climb toward light. For the sages of India and Tibet, time is not a straight road to oblivion. It is a wheel that turns again and again, carrying us through night and into day, through darkness and into renewal. And if their calculations are correct, then we are living at one of the most important thresholds in human history. The East teaches us that even in the darkest age, there is hope. The cycle cannot be stopped, but it can be understood, and in that understanding, we can prepare. For as the Kali Yuga wanes and a new dawn approaches, we are invited not to despair at collapse, but to participate in renewal. The question is whether we are ready to listen to the wisdom of the ancients, and whether we can recognize that their warnings, written across centuries, were meant not just for their time, but for ours. And as the wheel of time turns, we must journey even further east to the land where mysticism and empire intertwined, where emperors consulted astrologers, and where prophecies of dragons, dynasties, and cosmic cycles shaped the destiny of a civilization. China, with its mandate of heaven and its hidden calendars, also spoke of ages and thresholds, and perhaps of the years we are living through today. For thousands of years, the Chinese understood history not as random chance, but as the unfolding of cosmic law. Dynasties did not rise and fall solely by military strength or political cunning. They thrived or collapsed because of something deeper, something the ancient sages called the mandate of heaven. To hold this mandate meant to be in harmony with the cosmic order. To lose it meant that famine, rebellion, and disaster would sweep away a dynasty, no matter how powerful it seemed. This belief was not simply religious. It was political, philosophical, and historical all at once. The mandate of heaven shaped how emperors ruled, how rebellions justified themselves, and how ordinary people understood their place in the universe. And within this vast framework, cycles of time were carefully measured by hidden calendars, many of which seemed to point, strangely and ominously, toward the present century, and especially the years just ahead of us. The earliest Chinese dynasties, like the Zhou, believed that the mandate was bestowed by heaven, the supreme ordering force of the cosmos. Unlike the divine right of kings in Europe, the mandate was conditional. If a ruler became corrupt, if he taxed his people harshly, neglected rituals, or failed to bring balance to the land, heaven would send warnings. Eclipses, floods, earthquakes, comets streaking across the sky. If the warnings were ignored, heaven withdrew its favor, and rebellion was justified. In this way, the collapse of dynasties was never random. It was the inevitable result of falling out of alignment with cosmic law. Throughout Chinese history, one sees this pattern repeated again and again. The Shang fell to the Zhou because they had lost virtue. The Han dynasty rose and became one of the greatest empires in history, only to crumble after centuries of corruption and civil war. The Tang, the Song, the Ming all followed the same rhythm: rise, prosperity, decline, collapse, and renewal. Each time, chroniclers explained the fall by pointing to the mandate of heaven. And each time, the fall was preceded by omens, famines, floods, or celestial events that were carefully recorded by court astrologers. For in China, prophecy was not the domain of oracles speaking in riddles, but of astronomers mapping the heavens with meticulous precision. The ancient Chinese kept some of the most detailed astronomical records in the world, tracking eclipses, comets, and planetary conjunctions for thousands of years. To them, the heavens and the earth mirrored one another. If chaos erupted below, it was reflected above. If strange events unfolded above, then turmoil was certain to follow on earth. Emperors employed entire bureaus of astrologers to interpret the sky, not for idle curiosity, but for survival. A comet could topple a dynasty if interpreted as a loss of heaven's favor. An eclipse could trigger rebellion. And so, calendars became more than timekeepers. They became maps of destiny. One of the most mysterious of these systems was the sexagenary cycle, a repeating sequence of 60 years that combined heavenly stems and earthly branches. Within this framework, time itself was seen as patterned, with certain years carrying echoes of past years. The idea was simple but profound. Events repeat, not identically, but in resonance. A year of great upheaval might echo another upheaval 60 or 120 years earlier. In this way, Chinese historians and astrologers could anticipate when dynasties would weaken, when rebellion might arise, and when new leaders would appear. Over centuries, these cycles proved uncannily accurate, leading later scholars to wonder whether the ancients possessed a hidden science of time. Some esoteric traditions within Taoism and Chinese astrology took these ideas further. They mapped out vast cycles, not only of 60 years, but of 600, 1,800, and even 10,800 years, suggesting that human history itself unfolded in repeating patterns, governed by cosmic rhythms. In this framework, great transitions, times when one age gives way to another, were marked by the convergence of cycles. And according to certain interpretations, one such convergence lies in the early 21st century. In fact, some scholars point to the years around 2024 and 2025 as critical turning points within the 60-year cycle, resonating with moments of upheaval in Chinese and world history. Even in popular prophecy, echoes of these cycles survive. The so-called 28bei, a cryptic Chinese text of prophecy written in the Tang dynasty, is filled with illustrations and verses that many claim predicted later historical events, from the Mongol invasions to the fall of dynasties, even the world wars of the 20th century. Hidden within its verses are images of turmoil in the modern age, foreign powers invading, new technologies transforming society, and a great upheaval in the early 21st century, followed by renewal. Interpreters of this text argue that the verses describing our time correspond to major global changes around the 2020s, once again aligning with the pattern we have seen across other cultures. Another dimension of the Chinese worldview was the concept of the 5 phases, or Wu Xing: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Unlike the Western elements, these were not static substances, but dynamic forces that cycled through creation and destruction. Dynasties were associated with particular phases. When one dynasty weakened, it was explained as the exhaustion of its element, to be replaced by another. This model gave a cosmic rhythm to history itself, reinforcing the idea that no empire was eternal, that every age had its rise and fall. And here again, hidden calendars mapped the transitions, sometimes centuries in advance. When we look at our own time through this lens, the parallels are uncanny. The early 21st century has already been marked by extraordinary celestial events, rare planetary conjunctions, blood moons, eclipses seen across continents. To the modern world, these are astronomical curiosities. But to a Chinese astrologer of the Han or Tang dynasties, they would be unmistakable warnings that the mandate of heaven is shifting. The chaos of climate disasters, pandemics, and political upheaval would be seen not as random crises, but as evidence that the old order has lost its mandate. By this reasoning, the years around 2025 represent not just another political moment, but the turning of an entire age. Some modern scholars of Chinese metaphysics even argue that the 20-year flying star cycle of feng shui, another system tied to cosmic patterns, points to a dramatic shift in 2024 to 2025. According to this system, we are moving from period 8 into period 9, a transition that reshapes global energies. Period 9 is associated with fire, technology, communication, and upheaval, a perfect description of the challenges humanity now faces. In traditional interpretation, such transitions are times of both danger and opportunity, when empires collapse but new orders arise. Could it be that this cycle, preserved for centuries in China, is another confirmation that the threshold of 2025 is no ordinary moment, but the dawn of a new phase of history? If so, then the mandate of heaven takes on a global meaning. In the ancient world, it was a Chinese emperor who gained or lost the mandate. Today, with humanity linked in a single global system, perhaps the mandate applies to the entire civilization. If the signs of imbalance are clear, environmental collapse, political corruption, spiritual decay, then perhaps heaven is withdrawing its favor from the old structures. And if the calendars point to 2025 as the transition, then perhaps we are witnessing the transfer of the mandate, not to a single dynasty, but to a new age altogether. Thus, in China as in Rome, in India as in the North, the pattern repeats, prophecy encoded in cycles, warnings written in the stars, and thresholds marked by specific years. And once again, as we follow these threads across cultures, they converge eerily upon our own time. The ancients warned that power corrupts, that imbalance leads to collapse, that every age has its end. And the calendars, whether of 60 years or 26,000, whisper that the next ending and the next beginning are upon us now. As the dragon of the East offers its prophecy, we turn now across the ocean to the peoples of the Americas, who carved their visions into stone and measured the heavens with astonishing precision. Their calendars, too, speak of cycles, and their prophecies, too, have been tied, sometimes wrongly, sometimes with chilling accuracy, to the modern age. And when we revisit their warnings with fresh eyes, we find yet another voice whispering of the threshold of 2025. In the jungles of Central America, beneath the roots of ceiba trees and the ruins of ancient cities, lie the remnants of one of the most sophisticated calendrical systems ever devised. The Maya were not only architects of pyramids and builders of cities aligned with the stars, they were keepers of time. Their calendar, carved into stone and tracked with astonishing mathematical precision, was more than a tool for counting days. It was a cosmic map, a vision of cycles stretching thousands of years into past and future. When the world first heard that the Mayan calendar ended in 2012, many assumed it predicted apocalypse. But those who study it more deeply insist that 2012 was not the end, but the turning of an age, a gateway. If that was the doorway, then perhaps the years that follow, especially the mid-2020s, represent the true crossing into the new cycle. The Mayan system was built on interlocking calendars. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day cycle, governed ritual and divination. The Hab, a 365-day cycle, tracked the solar year. Together they formed the calendar round, repeating every 52 years. But beyond these lay the long count, a cycle of 5,125 years that measured entire eras of human history. According to Mayan cosmology, we live in the fifth such cycle, each previous world having ended in cataclysm, flood, fire, or earthquake before being reborn. The last cycle began in 3114 BCE and was calculated to end on December 21st, 2012. When that date arrived, the world held its breath. Some expected fire from the sky, others a shift in consciousness. Instead, life continued, though not without turbulence. Looking back, 2012 did mark the beginning of dramatic global changes. Within a decade, the world had seen political upheavals, pandemics, technological revolutions, and environmental crises on a scale few could have imagined. To the Maya, the end of a cycle was not the end of the world, but the resetting of the great cosmic clock. The years that followed were a transitional period, a time of chaos before the new order fully emerged. In this sense, 2012 was not the climax, it was the prologue. The real transformation, many argue, unfolds in the years immediately following, with 2025 as one of the most critical thresholds. The Hopi people of North America preserve a similar vision, though in their own unique language of prophecy. According to Hopi tradition, humanity has passed through several worlds, each destroyed when humans lost their way. We live now in the fourth world, but the signs of its collapse are all around us. The Hopi prophecies speak of the return of the blue star Kachina, a celestial sign that would herald the purification of the earth. They speak of roads in the sky and cobwebs across the land, images that eerily resemble airplanes and power lines. They warn of the day when the earth will be shaken, when waters will rise, and when fire will purify the world. But like the Maya, the Hopi do not see this as the final end. After destruction comes renewal, the dawn of the fifth world, a time when harmony with nature is restored. The parallels are striking. Both the Maya and the Hopi describe history as a sequence of worlds, each ending in cataclysm, each reborn anew. Both see the present age as nearing its end. Both emphasize signs in the sky, comets, stars, celestial alignments, as markers of the turning. And both traditions point, not vaguely, but with remarkable consistency, to the present era as the moment of transition. Some interpreters argue that the true shift foretold by the Mayan calendar is not a single day in 2012, but a span of years, a liminal period stretching into the mid-2020s. Indeed, Mayan elders themselves have spoken of this. In gatherings after 2012, they explained that the calendar's turning was only the beginning of a 13-year period of change, a gestation leading to a rebirth. By this reckoning, the pivotal year is not 2012, but 2025, the culmination of that transitional window. If true, then all of the upheavals of the last decade may be the labor pains of a new world, with the birth arriving in the very years we now approach. What makes this even more compelling is the astronomical context. The Maya were masters of tracking celestial cycles. They charted Venus, eclipses, and the movements of the Milky Way with astonishing accuracy. Their myths describe the sky as a great cosmic tree, the Milky Way as its trunk, and the crossing point of the sun through this galactic center as a moment of cosmic rebirth. Modern astronomy confirms that around 2012, the solstice sun aligned with the galactic center, a rare event marking the end of the long count. But this alignment was not a single moment. It was a process spanning years. Some scholars argue that the alignment window lasts until the mid-2020s, meaning that the true energetic climax of the cycle may still lie ahead. The Hopi, too, speak of celestial alignments as signs. Their prophecy of the blue star has been linked by some to supernovae or to unusual astronomical events visible in the sky. Others interpret it metaphorically as a sign of spiritual awakening. But either way, the emphasis is on a visible change, a moment when the heavens announce that the old world is collapsing. If the Mayan and Hopi prophecies are read together, they suggest that the turbulence of our era is not random. It is the fulfillment of cycles measured long ago. It is easy to dismiss such prophecies as coincidence, yet their symbolic accuracy cannot be ignored. We live in a time of fires, floods, plagues, and wars, exactly as these traditions warned. We see technology spinning webs across the world, changing our lives in ways unimaginable a century ago, just as the Hopi described. And we feel, on some deep level, that an age is ending, that the systems which governed the last centuries are collapsing. The ancients called this collapse purification. We call it crisis. But both words point to the same reality, the breaking of the old to make way for the new. The Mayas saw the new world as a time of renewal, a return to harmony between humanity and the cosmos. The Hopi speak of the fifth world, when humans remember their sacred relationship with the earth. In both traditions, survival depends not on technology or power, but on balance, humility, and wisdom. Those who cling to the ways of the old world are swept away. Those who live in harmony endure. If we accept this, then 2025 is not a date to fear, but a threshold to prepare for. It may mark the completion of the transitional period that began in 2012, the moment when the new age fully emerges. What that looks like may depend on how humanity responds. Will we cling to the collapsing structures, or will we step into the new dawn? The ancients could not make that choice for us. They could only warn us that the cycle would turn. What is astonishing is how the voices from the Americas join those from across the world. From the pyramids of Egypt to the scrolls of Rome, from the runes of the Norse to the Yugas of India, and now from the calendars of the Maya and the prophecies of the Hopi, the message is the same. History moves in cycles. Ages end and begin, and we are standing on the threshold of such a moment now. The convergence of prophecies on the years around 2025 is too consistent to ignore. And yet, there are more voices still. For even as the Mayan and Hopi prophecies echo across time, other cultures preserved visions in secret societies, in hidden manuscripts, and in esoteric traditions that whispered of the same turning. As we move deeper into this labyrinth of prophecy, we will find that Europe, too, guarded strange predictions, from medieval seers to Renaissance magicians, all pointing to a time of upheaval and transformation in our own era. The shadow of prophecy in Europe has always carried a sense of firelight and secrecy. Words whispered in monasteries, visions scratched on parchment, predictions recited in candlelit chambers, while outside the world shifted through wars, plagues, and empires. Unlike the stone-carved cycles of the Maya or the priestly astronomy of Egypt, Europe's prophecies were more elusive, often encoded in riddles and poetic verses. They arrived through strange dream visions, cryptic quatrains, and manuscripts said to be written under divine inspiration. Yet, across this tapestry of European seers, a remarkable consistency emerges. They foresaw upheavals that aligned disturbingly close to our own era, with many pointing specifically to the decade we now inhabit, the mid-2020s, as a time of dramatic transformation. The most famous of these voices is, of course, Nostradamus. Born Michel de Nostradamus in 1503 in southern France, Nostradamus lived during a world aflame with change. The Renaissance was blossoming, the Reformation tearing Christendom apart, and the old medieval order crumbling. A physician by training and an astrologer by passion, Nostradamus began writing a series of prophetic verses, quatrains, that he claimed were glimpses into the future. Published in 1555 as Les Prophecies, the book contained over 900 verses, written in a deliberately obscure style, mixing French, Latin, Greek, and wordplay. His cryptic tone has allowed for endless interpretations, yet century after century readers have found his words uncanny parallels to real events. Nostradamus's defenders point to his apparent foresight of events like the rise of Napoleon, the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, the Second World War, and even the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Skeptics argue these are coincidences or clever retrofitting. But whether by design or accident, the quatrains seem to have a timeless resonance, as if they contain archetypal warnings that repeat across ages. What matters most for us, however, is that within his sprawling verses, there are passages many interpreters tie to the 21st century, and specifically to the years approaching 2025. Several quatrains describe fire from the sky, great trembling of the earth, and a time when the old order shall fall. Others speak of a great leader from the north and wars that would engulf Europe. One notorious quatrain references the year 1999, seventh month, which was often cited as a warning of a doomsday that never came. But researchers point out that Nostradamus' dating was not precise. His system was layered in astrological symbolism. Some argue that the prophecy meant the opening of a dangerous era at the turn of the millennium rather than a single apocalyptic event. Seen this way, the turbulence of the early 21st century, from 9/11 to the wars of the Middle East, the financial crises, and the global pandemic, may well be the unfolding of what Nostradamus warned. Within this context, the mid-2020s appear not as a random date, but as the climax of this cycle. One quatrain in particular, often translated as speaking of the Great War in the West during the third decade of the century, has drawn new attention. It mentions famine, plague, and upheaval in both heaven and earth. Whether metaphor or literal warning, it resonates with our current reality: economic instability, environmental collapse, and technological disruption. Interpreters link these lines with 2024 to 2026, suggesting that Nostradamus envisioned a great turning point when old powers falter and humanity faces trials unlike any before. Yet Nostradamus was not alone. A century before him, in England, another enigmatic figure was already prophesying future calamities and transformations. Known as Mother Shipton, this 15th century woman, born in Yorkshire, was said to be a herbalist, seer, and witch. Legends surround her life, making it hard to separate fact from folklore, but the prophecies attributed to her gained immense popularity in later centuries. Shipton's verses, written in rhymed couplets, spoke of iron ships sailing without sails, of carriages moving without horses, of flying machines in the sky, images that uncannily resemble trains, cars, and airplanes centuries before their invention. But among her predictions were also warnings of upheaval in the years when the world shall shrink. Many interpreters connect this to the age of globalization and the internet, when distances collapsed and the world became a single, interconnected web. Within her verses are darker warnings, too, of floods, of fire from above, and of a final reckoning when humanity would be forced to choose between destruction and renewal. Like the Maya and Hopi, her prophecies suggest cycles of chaos followed by rebirth. Some scholars claim that unpublished or lost versions of her prophecies were suppressed because they spoke too directly of modern events, pinpointing the early 21st century as the culmination of the age. Other European manuscripts, less famous but equally haunting, emerged from monasteries, secret societies, and esoteric circles. The so-called monk of Padua was credited in the 14th century with predicting the fall of kingdoms and the rise of empires centuries before they occurred. The prophecy of the popes, attributed to a 12th century Irish bishop named Saint Malachy, lists a sequence of mottos describing each pope until the end of time. According to this prophecy, the current pope, Francis, is the final one, under whose reign Rome would face its destruction and the world a final judgment. If authentic, the implication is stark, that our era is not only transitional but climactic in the religious history of the West. Then there are the secret texts tied to alchemical and hermetic traditions. Renaissance magicians like Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus spoke of the turning of ages, of a time when hidden knowledge would return to light. Within Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century are whispers of a great renewal that would occur when the stars return to their place. Many occultists of later centuries interpreted this as a reference to astrological cycles culminating in the 21st century. To them, the years around 2025 were not an accident, but a destined threshold when hidden wisdom would either save humanity or be lost forever. It is worth noting how consistently European prophecies carry dual tones of warning and hope. Nostradamus warned of wars and calamities, yet he also spoke of a golden age following them. Mother Shipton envisioned fire and flood, but also a time when the earth would heal. St. Malachi's grim timeline of popes ends with judgment, yet some interpreters see this as the dawn of a purified faith. Again and again, the message is the same: collapse followed by renewal, chaos as a prelude to rebirth. And again, the timing seems to converge on our own era. For centuries, skeptics have dismissed these prophecies as superstition. And perhaps they are. Yet the strange persistence of these visions, their ability to resonate across centuries and to mirror the crises we face today, cannot be ignored. Whether by coincidence, archetype, or genuine foresight, the European seers joined the chorus of voices from Egypt, Babylon, India, and the Americas. They all point to a cycle now closing, to a threshold we are crossing, and to a moment in history that seems to climax in the years around 2025. Imagine the candlelit study of Nostradamus as he scribbled his quatrains, the dim cell of a medieval monk preserving a manuscript, or the fireside where villagers whispered of Mother Shipton's visions. These were not academics or politicians, but outsiders, people whose voices often straddled the line between madness and revelation. Yet their warnings survived, echoing down centuries until they reach us, here, now, at the dawn of an uncertain future. They did not know the internet, climate change, artificial intelligence, or global pandemics, but somehow their words speak to them all. And perhaps that is the point. Prophecy is not about predicting precise details. It is about attuning to cycles, sensing the undercurrents of change, and translating them into language that future generations can recognize when the time comes. If so, then our recognition of these patterns now means the time they foresaw is upon us. As the European voices fall silent, the stage is set for another layer of prophecy, one preserved not in cryptic quatrains or rural legends, but in the hidden libraries of secret orders, the whispered teachings of mystics, and the esoteric manuscripts that claim to carry knowledge from Atlantis itself. And when we examine those, the convergence on 2025 grows even more uncanny. In the dimly lit halls of Europe's old libraries, behind locked doors, and in dusty chambers where the air itself seems heavy with forgotten knowledge, lie manuscripts that speak of time not as a straight line, but as a great wheel. These were not texts meant for the masses. They were guarded by initiates, cloaked in allegory, shared only among those sworn to secrecy. For within them was a vision of the world that mainstream religion and science would never have allowed to flourish openly, a vision of cycles, of a cosmic clock ticking toward inevitable turning points. To the secret orders that preserved these manuscripts, prophecy was not a superstition. It was a coded science of time. And again, they pointed to our age as a moment of culmination, an age of fire and renewal converging around the years we now inhabit. The Rosicrucians were among the first to bring these whispers into the open, though even they wrapped their declarations in mystery. Emerging in the early 17th century, the Rosicrucian manifestos stunned Europe with talk of hidden brotherhoods, secret wisdom, and a coming age of enlightenment. The Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio Fraternitatis told the story of Christian Rosenkreutz, a mythical founder who had traveled to the East, gathering knowledge from Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. On his return, he formed a secret fraternity devoted to preserving esoteric truth. The Rosicrucian texts were filled with allegory, but at their heart was a promise. Humanity was approaching a great transformation, a new dawn. This was not merely political or cultural. The Rosicrucians believed in a cosmic order, a great year measured not in decades, but in millennia, echoing the precession of the equinoxes. Just as the ancients had spoken of golden ages and dark ages, so too did these mystics insist that history turned like a wheel. The age they lived in, they said, was nearing its close. What would follow was a purification, a rebirth, a restoration of hidden wisdom. If they looked forward centuries into the future, what might they have seen? For many interpreters, the Rosicrucian cycle hints directly at our own time, the early 21st century, as the fulfillment of their great renewal. The Freemasons, who emerged in the 18th century but drew upon older traditions, carried this symbolism even further. To the outside world, they were a fraternity of stonemasons and gentlemen engaged in charity and ritual. But beneath their public image lay layers of esoteric teaching. Their lodges were filled with Egyptian motifs, references to Solomon's temple, and symbols of cosmic architecture. The square and compass were not simply tools of builders. They were instruments of creation itself, marking the heavens and the earth. To the initiated, Freemasonry was a way of aligning the human soul with the architecture of the universe. Freemasonic writings often hinted that their true origins lay in ancient priesthoods, that their lineage stretched back to Egypt, to Babylon, even to Atlantis. Whether myth or truth, the implication was clear. They possessed fragments of a wisdom tradition that spoke of great cycles and impending transformations. In their rituals and lectures, the idea of the great work was central. On one level, it meant self-mastery. On another, it meant preparing humanity for an epochal shift. Within their symbolism lies the same duality we have seen everywhere: destruction and renewal, chaos and rebirth. Secret orders like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons were obsessed with numbers, astronomy, and sacred geometry. They inherited from Pythagoras and Plato the notion that numbers rule the cosmos. In the Great Year, the 26,000-year precession of the equinoxes, they found a cosmic clock of ages. Plato spoke of the Golden Age, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, echoes of the Indian Yugas and the Mayan cycles. The secret orders reinterpreted these for their own time. They believed that humanity was passing through the darkest age, but that a renewal would come when the stars aligned, when the wheel turned once more. Here, once again, the years around 2025 take on significance. Astrological traditions long preserved by esoteric schools point to this decade as a time of rare conjunctions and alignments. Some occult writers of the 19th and 20th centuries, many of them Rosicrucians or Masons, wrote openly that the world would undergo a great crisis around the quarter-century mark of the new millennium. They saw it not as random, but as the inevitable expression of the cosmic cycles they had inherited. Consider also the prophecies of the so-called Great Monarch and the Angelic Pope, legends circulating in esoteric Catholic and Rosicrucian circles. These figures were said to arise in a time of global chaos to restore order and bring a new spiritual age. For centuries, mystics placed their appearance in the distant future. But modern interpreters often tie these figures to the 21st century, suggesting that the archetype may manifest not as literal kings and popes, but as leaders, teachers, or movements emerging during the chaos of our own time. The year 2025, in this view, is not the end, but the crucible in which such forces are born. Hidden manuscripts preserved by Hermetic circles spoke, too, of the great year of the Phoenix. The Phoenix, symbol of death and rebirth, was adopted by Rosicrucians and Freemasons alike. To them, it was not just a metaphor for the soul, but for entire civilizations. The cycle of death and rebirth was inevitable, and the Phoenix rose from its ashes at predetermined intervals. Several alchemical texts describe these intervals as spanning centuries, culminating in a fiery purification of both matter and spirit. When scholars decoded these allegories, many noticed that the timing aligned suspiciously well with the early 21st century. The manuscripts hinted that after a long winter of materialism and conflict, a fiery transformation would come, exactly the crisis we now face in climate, technology, and geopolitics. Even in the modern age, secret societies have not abandoned these prophecies. Freemasonic writings of the 19th century spoke openly of 2000 to 2050 as an age of upheaval. Rosicrucian teachings in the early 20th century referred to the Aquarian Age, beginning in earnest around the 2020s, a period when hidden wisdom would emerge once again into public life. The Theosophical Society, inheriting much of this lore, spoke of world teachers appearing in the 21st century. These predictions, whether mystical or symbolic, echo with uncanny precision the crises and awakenings of our time. What is striking is how carefully these secret orders wove their teachings into symbols and allegories, hiding plain truths in ritual drama. To the uninitiated, it was pageantry. To the initiated, it was prophecy. When a mason walked between the twin pillars of Boaz and Jachin, he was reenacting the passage between cycles, the death of one world and the birth of another. When a Rosicrucian meditated on the rose and cross, he was contemplating the eternal union of suffering and transcendence, chaos and renewal. In these symbols, one finds the same story told by Egypt, Babylon, and the Maya. That time moves in great cycles, and that humanity, whether ready or not, must cross thresholds when they arrive. And now we arrive at one such threshold. To the outside world, 2025 is simply another year on the calendar. But to those who listen to the whispers of the past, it is something more, a moment inscribed in the stars, calculated by astronomers, encoded in rituals, preserved in secret. It is the climax of the great work, the turning of the great year, the rising of the phoenix. Whether this means collapse, awakening, or both, depends not on the orders themselves, but on humanity as a whole. The manuscripts and rituals of these secret societies remind us of something uncomfortable, that history does not drift randomly. It follows rhythms older than nations, older than empires, older even than religion itself. And according to those rhythms, we stand on the edge of transformation. From here, the path of prophecy leads outward still further. For beyond the manuscripts of Europe and the lodges of secret societies lies the East once again, where Indian sages preserved visions of the Yugas and Tibetan mystics spoke of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom that would rise at the end of the age. As we follow that path, the convergence upon 2025 only grows more striking. Far to the east, in the land of sages and ascetics, where the Himalayas pierce the sky and the Ganges flows like a river of time, the concept of history was never linear. In India, the past and the future were not separate points, but echoes in an eternal rhythm. The sages who composed the Vedas and the Puranas did not speak of history as a straight march of progress. Instead, they spoke of yugas, great cosmic ages through which the world passes again and again, like the seasons of an eternal year. The Yuga cycle is one of the most profound prophetic systems humanity has inherited. According to traditional Hindu cosmology, there are 4 ages: Satya Yuga, the golden age of truth and harmony; Treta Yuga, the silver age, where righteousness declines; Dvapara Yuga, the bronze age, when conflict grows stronger; and Kali Yuga, the dark age, where ignorance, corruption, and suffering dominate. Each age is shorter and darker than the one before, and when the cycle ends, it begins again with a renewal, as the cosmos breathes out destruction and breathes in creation. By traditional reckoning, we are deep in Kali Yuga, which began thousands of years ago after the death of Krishna, and which will last for more than 400,000 years. But not all agree with this vast time scale. In the 19th century, Sri Yukswar, the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, reinterpreted the Yuga cycle, arguing that mainstream Hindu chronology had been miscalculated. According to Yukswar, the Yugas are far shorter and humanity is not in the depths of Kali Yuga, but on the cusp of ascending into Dvapara and beyond. By his calculations, the great turning began in the late 19th century, and the 21st century, particularly the decades around 2025, would mark a critical shift when humanity would begin to emerge from darkness into greater spiritual awareness. The idea that we are crossing a Yuga boundary resonates with many who sense the turbulence of our age. The rise of technology, the collapse of old systems, the ecological crisis, and the hunger for spiritual renewal all fit the pattern of a transition between ages. The prophecies embedded in the Yugas are not vague poetry, but structured cycles, predicting exactly this: the collapse of morality and balance, followed by the painful but necessary rebirth of civilization. For many modern interpreters, 2025 is not simply a random year. It is one of the points in the Great Wheel where the gears shift, grinding painfully as humanity moves from one age to the next. India's prophetic traditions do not stop with the Yugas. The Puranas and epic texts like the Mahabharata describe the end of the Kali Yuga in vivid imagery. Rivers drying up, kings becoming tyrants, families fracturing, and truth vanishing from the earth. And then, in the midst of the darkness, the appearance of Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, riding on a white horse, wielding a sword of fire to destroy evil and restore righteousness. In esoteric circles, Kalki is not interpreted as a literal figure, but as a symbol of the great purification, the destruction of falsehood, and the rebirth of Dharma. Once again, the message is collapse followed by renewal. In the mountains of Tibet, another strand of prophecy runs parallel. Tibetan mystics spoke of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom beyond time, invisible to ordinary eyes but preserved in the higher realms. Shambhala, according to Tibetan prophecy, will emerge when the world falls into chaos. When greed, war, and materialism consume humanity, the warriors of Shambhala will rise. They will not fight with ordinary weapons, but with the power of wisdom and compassion, shattering the illusions of darkness. For centuries, lamas have taught that this prophecy refers to an age of great crisis, when the old order crumbles and a new one is born. Modern interpreters of the Shambhala prophecy see our current century as the time of its fulfillment. The warriors of Shambhala are not an army in the traditional sense, but those who awaken to truth and fight the inner and outer battles of ignorance. The timing, once again, points to the early 21st century when humanity faces a crossroads. Some Tibetan prophecies even speak of specific cycles of 101,000 years converging in our era. They describe this as the time when the iron bird will fly in the skies and the world will be connected by webs, a vision that eerily resembles airplanes and the internet. The convergence is remarkable. In India, the Yuga cycles describe the end of darkness and the beginning of renewal. In Tibet, the prophecy of Shambhala foretells a great battle between ignorance and wisdom, fought not with weapons but with awareness. Both point to a climactic moment when humanity faces collapse, but also receives the chance for transformation. Both suggest that we are living in that very threshold. It is not just mystical speculation. Modern astrologers and scholars of comparative religion have pointed out how these cycles intersect with global events. The Yuga transitions, if calculated by Sri Yukswar's system, place a major turning point in the early 21st century. Tibetan cycles of prophecy also mark this period as pivotal. And when we look around us, we see the evidence. A world where technology brings miracles but also immense peril, where climate change and ecological collapse threaten survival, where nations clash and old systems crumble, but where spiritual hunger grows stronger than ever. Prophecy in the East is often subtle, woven into myth and allegory rather than blunt prediction. But its essence is clear. The world is not static. Ages end and begin. And in the midst of collapse, the seeds of renewal are sown. If the prophecies are true, then 2025 may be remembered not as the end of the world, but as the crossing into a new cycle, the painful birth of a higher age. What is most compelling is how these Eastern traditions mirror the West. The Yugas echo the great year of Plato and the phoenix cycles of the Rosicrucians. The Shambhala prophecy echoes the messianic hopes of Christianity and the renewal visions of the Hopi. All tell the same story in different languages. History is cyclical, and humanity is on the edge of transformation. And so, as we leave the Himalayas and descend from the heights of prophecy, the question grows louder. If all these cycles point to our age, what exactly awaits us? Are we moving toward collapse, toward a purging fire, or toward an awakening of consciousness unlike anything before? The ancients left us clues, but not certainty. That part of the prophecy is ours to fulfill. If the ancient prophets spoke in visions and symbols, the modern prophets speak in data, graphs, and warnings. They are not cloaked in robes, but in lab coats. Yet strangely, the message is the same. Something unprecedented is approaching. And the closer we come to 2025, the louder these scientific voices grow, as though their findings were echoing across millennia to meet the prophecies of old. Climate science is perhaps the most urgent of these voices. For decades, researchers have tracked rising temperatures, melting ice, and shifting weather patterns. But what makes the years around 2025 so significant is that many models point to this decade as the point of no return, the threshold where feedback loops become irreversible. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns of tipping points, thresholds in the Earth system that, once crossed, will accelerate warming beyond human control. By 2025, several of these tipping points are predicted to loom dangerously close. The melting of Arctic permafrost, for example, threatens to release massive amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide. Scientists have already recorded alarming methane bursts bubbling up from Siberian lakes. The collapse of ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica could also accelerate sea level rise, reshaping coastlines and displacing millions. And in the Amazon rainforest, deforestation combined with climate stress risks turning the lungs of the Earth into a savanna, releasing more carbon than it absorbs. Each of these events has its own timescale, but together they form a pattern. Many experts suggest the mid-2020s as the window when humanity must decide whether to halt catastrophe or trigger cascading collapses. And here lies the eerie echo. Ancient traditions spoke of fire, floods, and great upheavals marking the turning of the age. Modern science describes them in different language, but with chilling precision. But climate is only one axis of this convergence. Technology is another. In the span of a single generation, humanity has moved from primitive computing to artificial intelligence capable of creating art, writing, decision-making, and even self-learning. By 2025, AI systems are expected to surpass human capability in more domains than ever before. Economists warn of automation displacing entire industries, while philosophers question what it means to be human in a world where intelligence itself is no longer our exclusive domain. There is a deep unease in this technological acceleration. On one hand, AI could help solve humanity's greatest crises, from climate modeling to medical breakthroughs. On the other, it could destabilize economies, magnify inequality, and even, if unchecked, threaten human autonomy itself. Prophecies from multiple traditions spoke of a great deceiver, a force that mimics truth but leads astray. Could AI, our own creation, be that deceiver, offering dazzling progress while eroding the very fabric of human identity? Linked to this is the rise of biotechnology and genetic engineering. In laboratories around the world, scientists are rewriting the code of life itself. CRISPR technology allows for precise editing of genes, opening the door to curing disease, but also to altering humanity in ways once confined to myth. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia to India spoke of gods who created, destroyed, and remade humans. Today, science stands at the threshold of fulfilling that role. By the mid-2020s, gene editing could move from experimental trials to mainstream application, raising profound ethical and spiritual questions. Economics, too, adds another layer. The global financial system has grown increasingly fragile, with massive debts, digital currencies, and geopolitical rivalries reshaping the balance of power. By 2025, many analysts predict significant turbulence, whether through the collapse of traditional banking, the rise of central bank digital currencies, or the weaponization of economic systems in global conflicts. In prophetic language, money is often tied to control, to the mark by which people buy and sell. In technological terms, we are rapidly moving toward a world where currency is digitized, traceable, and controllable at a scale never before possible. All of these crises, climate, technology, economy, intersect with geopolitics. Rising tensions between Great powers, wars over resources, and the competition for technological dominance intensify as 2025 approaches. The prophets of old described wars of nations, battles of kings, in a time when the earth itself seemed to rebel. Today, news headlines mirror these warnings. Conflicts flare, alliances shift, and the possibility of global confrontation hovers like a shadow. Nuclear arsenals remain primed. Cyber warfare opens new frontiers, and resource scarcity threatens to ignite unrest across continents. When we step back, the pattern emerges. The ancients described cycles where corruption, greed, and imbalance brought the world to collapse. They spoke of floods, fire, famine, and the rising of a new order. Modern science and geopolitics describe a world nearing systemic tipping points: ecological, technological, economic, and political. Both narratives converge on the same warning. The world cannot continue on its present path without rupture. But here is the deeper layer, often overlooked. Scientists themselves increasingly use language of awakening and transformation. Climate reports speak not only of danger, but of opportunity, urging a shift to renewable energy, sustainable economies, and new forms of cooperation. Tech visionaries speak of AI not only as a threat, but as a chance to expand consciousness and accelerate knowledge. Economists speak of crisis as a reset, a rebalancing of broken systems. In a strange way, the language of science and prophecy overlap. Both describe collapse and renewal, destruction and rebirth. What makes 2025 so compelling is the synchronicity. The models, the prophecies, the cycles, they all point here. Not as an arbitrary date, but as a symbolic crossroads where humanity must choose its path. The ancients cloaked it in myth. Modern scientists cloak it in data. Yet the message is the same: a great reckoning is near. For those immersed in the esoteric traditions, this convergence is no accident. They argue that prophecy and science are not opposites, but reflections of the same deeper truth. The universe moves in cycles, and humanity is both witness and participant in those cycles. The storms of climate, the rise of machines, the fragility of economies, all are outer expressions of an inner transformation. As we move further into this documentary, the question becomes sharper. If science itself now confirms what prophecy long warned, that a tipping point is imminent, then what lies beyond the threshold? Are we facing collapse, renewal, or both at once? And more importantly, are we ready? Throughout history, there have always been currents of knowledge that ran beneath the surface of mainstream culture. Secret societies, occult brotherhoods, and esoteric schools that claim to preserve truths too dangerous or too profound for the masses. Their influence often remained hidden, surfacing only in symbols carved into cathedrals, in coded manuscripts, or in whispered initiation rituals. And when we look closely at their timelines, their secret cosmologies, a startling pattern emerges. Many of them, from vastly different traditions, pointed their calendars toward the early 21st century, and specifically toward the window of 2025. Let us begin with one of the most influential modern esoteric movements, the Theosophical Society. Founded in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Theosophy sought to revive ancient wisdom, blending Hindu, Buddhist, and Western occult traditions. Blavatsky claimed to have received teachings from mysterious Mahatmas, adepts dwelling in Tibet who guided humanity's evolution. According to these teachings, history unfolds in great cycles, each overseen by spiritual hierarchies. Alice A. Bailey, a successor to Blavatsky, carried these ideas forward into the 20th century. Bailey's writings are crucial here because she explicitly identified 2025 as a pivotal year. In her texts, dictated by what she called the Tibetan master Jwal Khul, she described a hidden spiritual hierarchy governing the evolution of humanity. She wrote that every 100 years, a major conclave of these adepts takes place, reviewing humanity's progress and opening the door to new phases of enlightenment. The next great conclave, she said, would occur in 2025, a year that would determine the unfolding of the coming century. Bailey framed it not as prophecy in the religious sense, but as an occult timetable, a date etched into the very structure of spiritual governance. For theosophists and their successors in the New Age movement, 2025 is not just another year. It is the turning of the wheel, when hidden masters would decide whether humanity was ready to step into a new age of cooperation and higher consciousness, or whether it would descend deeper into materialism and conflict. Even now, theosophical circles quietly prepare for this date, believing it to mark the opening of a new spiritual cycle. The Freemasons offer another thread in this hidden timeline. Publicly, Freemasonry is often dismissed as a fraternal order with rituals and philanthropy. But embedded in its degrees and symbols is a deep preoccupation with cosmic cycles, sacred geometry, and the rebirth of civilizations. The Masons inherited much from earlier currents, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and even the remnants of Templar lore. Their rituals often reference the destruction and rebuilding of Solomon's Temple, a metaphor for the fall and rebirth of humanity itself. Researchers into Masonic numerology point out that many Masonic calendars, such as the Anno Lucas system, which adds 4,000 years to the Gregorian calendar to mark the Year of Light, are designed to link human history to cosmic time. Certain Masonic scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries hinted at the importance of the 21st century, suggesting that around its first quarter, a new temple of humanity would begin to rise. While not as explicit as Bailey's prediction, the undercurrent remains. Masonic lore holds that our era is one of transition, where the old order must fall so that a new edifice can be built. The Rosicrucians, that mysterious brotherhood that first announced itself in Europe in the early 17th century, provide yet another hidden chronology. Their manifestos spoke of a secret fraternity working for the renewal of science, religion, and society. They were obsessed with the idea of cycles, of knowledge being revealed at precise intervals when humanity was ready. One of their core myths, the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz, described a hidden chamber sealed for 120 years to be opened at the appointed time. Rosicrucian groups that survived into the modern era, such as Amorc, continued this tradition of timing revelations to cosmic rhythms. Many Rosicrucian writings emphasize that the early 21st century would mark the dawning of a new age of Aquarius, when hidden wisdom would move from secrecy into the public domain. This overlaps strikingly with theosophical timelines pointing to 2025, suggesting that different streams of esoteric thought were drawing on a shared source of ancient calendrical knowledge. Even more shadowy are the whispers of the Order of Nine Unknown Men, a legendary Indian brotherhood said to have been founded by Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BCE. According to lore, these 9 sages were tasked with preserving and guarding secret knowledge, sciences that could destroy humanity if misused. Their existence is unproven, but stories of their influence recur across centuries. Some modern esoteric researchers believe that the 9 operate according to long cycles, releasing fragments of knowledge when the world is ready. If so, the technological explosion of our own era, the internet, genetic engineering, AI, may represent the opening of one of their sealed volumes. And once again, the convergence with 2025 is uncanny, a time when forbidden knowledge suddenly leaps into public hands. Beyond individual groups, there is a larger pattern, the obsession with the Great Year, a 25,920-year precessional cycle known to the ancients, from the Babylonians to the Maya. Esoteric societies from the Renaissance onward were aware of this cycle, believing it marked epochs of rise and fall. Many of them mapped smaller cycles within it, pointing to the 21st century as the beginning of a shift into a new aeon. And here lies the tantalizing thought. What if these secret societies were not inventing arbitrary timelines, but preserving fragments of a much older science of time, one that encoded astronomical cycles, spiritual rhythms, and historical turning points? In this light, the convergence on 2025 is not coincidence, but design, the activation point of a timetable long kept hidden. The skeptic might dismiss these connections as vague, as cherry-picked symbols strung together. But when we step back, the resonance is too strong to ignore. The Theosophists explicitly name 2025. The Rosicrucians speak of the early Aquarian Age. The Freemasons hint at a rebuilding in the first quarter of this century. And across them all runs the motif of cycles, of hidden knowledge revealed at appointed times. The question that remains is this: what do they expect to happen? For the Theosophists, it is a spiritual conclave deciding humanity's future. For the Rosicrucians, it is the unveiling of hidden wisdom. For the Freemasons, it is the building of a new temple, both literal and symbolic. And for the Nine Unknown, it is the release of knowledge capable of remaking the world. Different visions, but all converging on the same threshold. If the ancients gave us prophecies of gods and avatars, the secret societies gave us maps, calendars, and coded instructions. And according to them, the year 2025 is not just a date. It is an initiation, a gateway into a new stage of the human experiment. Whether we pass through it with wisdom or folly will determine the nature of the age to come. The ancients were not the only ones who gazed into the currents of time. In the modern world, too, certain individuals claim to see what lies ahead: prophets, seers, and visionaries who spoke of events beyond their own lives. Some of them were ridiculed, others revered, and many left behind predictions that still provoke debate today. And as we approach the middle of the 21st century, a startling number of these prophecies converge on the same period: the years around 2025. Among the most famous modern prophets is Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet of America. Born in 1877, Cayce would enter trance states in which he delivered thousands of readings on health, spirituality, and the future. His followers meticulously recorded his words, which often contained strikingly accurate insights. Cayce's future predictions are especially haunting. He spoke of dramatic earth changes, rising seas, shifting coastlines, and violent storms that would reshape the globe. In his visions, New York and much of Japan would sink beneath the waters, while portions of northern Europe would disappear overnight. What makes Cayce's prophecies relevant to our focus is their timing. He repeatedly pointed to the years around the turn of the millennium as the beginning of upheaval, but he identified the 2020s as the decisive decade. He described a period when the earth would break up in many places and when humanity would be forced to reckon with both natural disaster and spiritual awakening. Some of his statements even specifically mention by the year 2025 as a threshold moment when the great changes would either accelerate or begin to stabilize. For Cayce, this was not simply catastrophe. It was a necessary cleansing, leading to a new era of cooperation and spiritual evolution. Across the Atlantic, the enigmatic figure of Nostradamus has continued to fuel speculation. The 16th century French physician wrote his famous quatrains, cryptic verses that many believe predicted events from the rise of Napoleon to the Second World War. Interpretations of Nostradamus are notoriously slippery, but several researchers have focused on his allusions to the early 21st century. Some quatrains describe global conflict, fiery destruction, and the appearance of a new leader or savior figure. Others point to celestial phenomena and climate upheavals. While Nostradamus did not write in terms of exact years like 2025, interpreters of his astrological references often calculate the mid-2020s as a critical juncture. One recurring theme is the alignment of great powers in conflict, which many see reflected in today's rising geopolitical tensions. Whether or not one accepts Nostradamus as genuine prophecy, the fascination remains. His words are continually reapplied to unfolding events, and once again, the target window is the decade we now inhabit. Then there are the psychics and remote viewers of the 20th century. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union funded secret programs exploring psychic phenomena. The CIA and U.S. military, through projects like Stargate, trained remote viewers to see across space and time. These individuals claim to describe hidden facilities, future events, even extraterrestrial contacts. Declassified documents show that the government took these abilities seriously enough to invest millions of dollars over decades. One of the most intriguing aspects of remote viewing is its use in predicting future scenarios. Former participants have spoken openly about visions of Earth changes, technological leaps, and social transformation in the early 21st century. A few even mentioned the mid-2020s as a time when something breaks open, a veil lifting to reveal truths long hidden. These are not vague prophecies from medieval times, but accounts from trained individuals working under government supervision. Whether one believes in their accuracy or not, the fact remains, the remote viewers, like the ancient mystics, saw the 2020s as a window of profound transition. Other modern seers have contributed to the chorus. The Bulgarian mystic Baba Vanga, blind since childhood, became famous for her uncanny predictions of world events. She foresaw the September 11th attacks, the rise of ISIS, and the Fukushima disaster with startling detail. Though her prophecies are sometimes sensationalized, many of her statements about the 21st century focus on the years around 2025. She predicted breakthroughs in energy, contact with higher intelligences, and massive environmental challenges converging in this period. Some interpretations of her sayings even suggest that 2025 will mark the beginning of a long conflict that reshapes global power. We also find modern indigenous voices adding to this pattern. Some Hopi elders have spoken of a period of purification in the early 21st century, when humanity must choose between two paths, the path of greed and destruction, or the path of balance and survival. These prophecies, like those of Casey and Vanga, do not frame the future as fixed, but as contingent, an unfolding that depends on collective human choice. Still, the years around 2025 are seen as decisive. Even within popular culture, echoes of these timelines emerge. Think of the fascination with apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic narratives in film and literature. While often dismissed as entertainment, they reflect a deeper collective anxiety, a sense that our age is nearing a breaking point. Writers and creators, consciously or unconsciously, channel the archetypes of prophecy, collapse, purification, and rebirth. It is no accident that so many of these works set their climaxes in the near future, the decades we are now living. When we weave these threads together, Casey's Earth Changes, Nostradamus' cryptic quatrains, Baba Vanga's visions, the CIA's remote viewers, a picture emerges that is difficult to ignore. Across continents and centuries, voices both mystical and scientific, secret and public, all point toward the same horizon. They warn of upheaval, but also promise transformation. They describe danger, but also opportunity. And they cluster again and again around the window of the 2020s, with 2025 glowing at the center like a beacon. Of course, skeptics argue that such patterns are coincidence, that vague predictions are easily retrofitted to unfolding events. But here we return to the question of synchronicity. Why do so many disparate voices from different traditions and contexts converge on the same moment in time? If nothing else, it reveals a collective intuition that humanity senses its own acceleration toward a threshold. The prophets, whether in trance or in vision, gave shape to what perhaps we all feel, that we are on the edge of something vast. As we stand on the threshold of 2025, the words of these modern seers take on new weight. Were they glimpsing literal catastrophes or symbolic shifts in consciousness? Were they predicting destruction or warning us so that destruction could be avoided? Perhaps both. What is certain is that their voices join the great chorus of prophecy that stretches back to the ancients. And that chorus grows louder the closer we come to the moment itself. Every prophecy, every cycle, every scientific warning we have explored so far seems to circle around one number like moths drawn to a flame. 2025. It is the year that appears again and again in ancient myths, in the calendars of secret orders, in the data models of scientists, and in the visions of modern prophets. And the question rises, pressing, undeniable, why? Why does 2025 stand apart from all the rest? To answer this, we must imagine human history not as a straight line, but as a vast wheel, turning through ages and epochs. Each spoke of the wheel is a cycle, astronomical, geological, spiritual, and at certain points, these spokes align. When they align, pressure builds, systems strain, and transformation erupts. It is like the gears of a clock suddenly clicking into sync, striking the hour that changes everything. That hour, according to prophecy and science alike, is ringing now. Consider first the astronomical cycles. The ancients knew the heavens were a clock. The Mayans calculated vast calendars tied to the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle of roughly 25,920 years. Hindu sages spoke of yugas lasting tens of thousands of years, with their own periods of rise and decline. Even Western philosophers like Plato described the great year, when the heavens return to their starting point. By multiple calculations, the early 21st century marks a transition within these cycles, a shift not just of years, but of cosmic ages. For some, this means the dawn of Aquarius. For others, the crossing from Kali Yuga's darkness into a brighter age. Overlay onto this the occult chronologies. Alice Bailey, inheritor of Theosophy, wrote explicitly that 2025 would be the next great conclave of the spiritual hierarchy, the moment when hidden adepts decide the next phase of humanity's evolution. The Rosicrucians, with their sealed tombs and scheduled revelations, also pointed to this century as the opening of a new era. Freemasonic lore hints at the rebuilding of the temple in this same window. Whether coded in esoteric calendars or spelled out directly, the message is clear. Initiates of secret wisdom considered 2025 a gateway year, long before our headlines caught up to it. Then comes the voice of modern science. Climate researchers warned that by the mid-2020s, key tipping points will be dangerously close. Permafrost releasing methane, rainforests collapsing, ice sheets destabilizing. Economists whisper that global systems of debt and finance cannot stretch much further without rupture. Technologists herald 2025 as the dawn of AI supremacy, a point when machines will surpass human capabilities in ways that alter every sector of society. Political analysts speak of 2025 as a likely flashpoint for escalating great power tensions. The language is not mythic, but the essence is the same, a convergence of crises and breakthroughs that could remake the world. And finally, the prophets and seers. Edgar Cayce warned of earth changes and upheavals around the 2020s, naming 2025 as a pivot year. Baba Vanga foresaw breakthroughs in energy and great conflicts near this time. Remote viewers trained by governments spoke of a veil lifting in the mid-2020s, of knowledge released and realities shifting. Nostradamus's cryptic quatrains, filtered through modern interpretation, circle around the same period of global conflict and rebirth. Different voices, different languages, the same resonance. 2025 is a threshold. What makes this truly extraordinary is not any single prediction, but the convergence. Imagine strands of thread, Hindu yugas, Mayan backtons, theosophical calendars, climate models, psychic visions, all weaving together, nodding at the same point in time. One could dismiss each strand in isolation, but when they all knot together at 2025, dismissal becomes harder. Coincidence begins to look like pattern. Pattern begins to look like destiny. But what does this convergence mean? The prophecies offer varied answers. Some speak of apocalypse, floods, fire, collapse. Others speak of awakening, a rise in consciousness, the unveiling of hidden wisdom. Some see both, destruction as the birth pangs of a new age. Science, too, frames it this way. Tipping points can lead to disaster, yes, but they can also be pivot points, moments when humanity reorients itself towards sustainability, cooperation, and transformation. In other words, 2025 is not simply an ending. It is a crossroads. To grasp the magnitude of this moment, Think of human civilization as a river. For centuries, it has flowed in one direction: industrialization, growth, extraction, technology, conquest. That river now approaches a fork. One branch leads to collapse, ecological ruin, technological domination, social disintegration. The other leads to renewal, harmony with the planet, the integration of technology with wisdom, the emergence of a more awakened humanity. At the fork stands 2025, the year when choices solidify, when momentum shifts, when the path becomes clear. This explains why the ancients cloaked their prophecies in such dire imagery. They knew that thresholds are dangerous places. At the gate of transformation, forces of chaos rise to resist change. Old systems cling desperately to power. Darkness deepens before dawn breaks. To speak of this time was to warn and to prepare so that humanity would not stumble blindly into collapse. The myths of Ragnarok, of Kali Yuga's end, of Shambhala's final battle, all reflect this truth. Before renewal comes fire. And so we stand in that fire now. 2025 is not a single apocalyptic event, not a date circled on a calendar when the sky will fall. It is a symbolic hinge, a year that crystallizes the transition already underway. Its significance lies not in one cataclysm, but in the alignment of many pressures: natural, technological, spiritual, political. It is the moment when the patterns converge so tightly that change becomes inevitable. The climactic convergence of 2025, then, is less about prediction than about recognition. The ancients, the secret orders, the prophets, and the scientists all recognized the rhythm of cycles, the pulse of transformation. They each gave it different names, different faces. But what they all saw was the same truth. Humanity would one day reach a threshold where survival and evolution demanded a leap. That threshold is here. Whether 2025 will be remembered as the year of collapse or the year of awakening depends not on prophecy, but on us. The prophecies serve as warnings, the science as evidence, the secret chronologies as signposts. But the choice is not yet sealed. The wheel has brought us to the gate, but we are the ones who must step through. In this light, the true meaning of the convergence is profound. 2025 is not an inevitable apocalypse. It is an invitation, a call to transformation, issued across centuries and cultures. It is the moment when the veil thins, when the gears of time align, when humanity stands at the crossroads of its destiny. The ancients knew it, the mystics whispered it, and science now confirms it. And so, as we draw toward the final movements of this story, one question towers above all others. What will we choose? When the cycles turn, when the prophecies converge, when the hour strikes, what kind of world will be born from the fire of 2025? As the wheel of prophecy turns and the echoes of 2025 grow louder, we are left with a final question. What is to be done? All along this journey, we have sifted through myths and manuscripts, through visions and calendars, through science and speculation. We have seen that across cultures, across centuries, the human imagination has fixated on thresholds, moments when a known world dissolves and a new one begins. And again, the patterns brought us here to the moment we now inhabit. But prophecy, for all its drama and dire warnings, is not a prison. It is not a script written in stone. It is more like a compass, pointing toward possibilities, urging us to prepare, to awaken, to decide. The ancients encoded their wisdom in cycles because they knew that nothing lasts forever. Not kingdoms, not empires, not even ages of the world. Everything rises and falls, breathes in and out. And when the breath pauses, when the cycle turns, humanity faces a choice. That choice is the true heart of prophecy. Consider again the traditions we explored. The Mayan Bactuns did not end with apocalypse, but with renewal. Hindu cosmology describes not only the decline of Kali Yuga, but the promise of Satya Yuga to come. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok's destruction, but also of the rebirth of gods and men in a purified world. Even Edgar Cayce's visions of Earth changes were paired with a new golden age of cooperation and spiritual understanding. Always, the darkness was followed by dawn. Always, prophecy pointed not only to what could be lost, but to what might yet be gained. And this is the great paradox of prophecy. It terrifies us to awaken us. By painting images of collapse, it shocks us out of complacency. By speaking of thresholds, it reminds us that nothing is inevitable, that futures are born from choices. The ancients were not so different from us. They, too, lived with uncertainty, with war and famine, with the rise and fall of empires. Their prophecies were both mirrors of their own anxieties and maps for those yet to come. They left us warnings, yes, but also a vision of possibility. In the modern world, we often dismiss prophecy as superstition. We favor data, statistics, projections. And yet, what are climate models but another kind of prophecy? What are economic forecasts or geopolitical risk assessments, if not attempts to read the signs of what is coming? The language may be different, graphs instead of gods, algorithms instead of oracles, but the impulse is the same. We sense the storm on the horizon, and we seek to name it, to chart it, to prepare. In this way, prophecy has never left us. It has only changed its costume. So where does that leave us, here on the cusp of 2025? Perhaps with a sobering truth. We are both the inheritors of prophecy and the authors of its fulfillment. The wheel has turned, the cycles have aligned, the hour has struck, but what happens next depends on us. Will we continue down the path of extraction and division, a blind technology and unchecked greed? Or will we heed the warnings encoded in myth and vision, and steer toward a more balanced world? Some say humanity cannot change, that collapse is inevitable. And yet, history tells another story. Time and again, societies have adapted, reinvented themselves, risen from ashes. The Renaissance followed the Black Death. The Enlightenment rose from centuries of war. Out of crisis comes creativity. Out of destruction comes rebirth. If 2025 is a threshold, then it is also an invitation to reimagine who we are and what kind of world we wish to inhabit. This is why the legacy of prophecy matters. It is not about predicting dates or tallying disasters. It is about remembering that humanity is part of a larger rhythm, a dance of cycles that stretches beyond any one lifetime. It is about humbling ourselves before forces greater than us, while also claiming our responsibility as conscious beings. The ancients knew that when the stars shifted, when the ages turned, people could either resist and fall or adapt and flourish. That lesson remains. Perhaps, in the end, prophecy is not about knowing the future at all. Perhaps it is about awakening to the present, the fragile, precious present in which choices are made. The prophets of old may have spoken in symbols, but their message is clear enough. The future is not fixed, but it is fragile. Treat it with reverence. Shape it with wisdom. Enter it with courage. And so, as we step into the shadow and light of 2025, we carry with us the weight of centuries of prophecy. We carry the whispers of Mayan astronomers, of Vedic sages, of Norse skalds, of mystics in trance and scientists in labs. All of them point to this moment, this crossroads. Their voices rise like a chorus through time, asking us not to fear, but to awaken. The wheel has turned. The cycles converge. The hour strikes. What remains is the choice, and it is ours to make. As you finish this journey, consider the ancient words, as above, so below, as within, so without. The sky mirrors the earth, and the earth mirrors the human heart. If 2025 is a gateway, then we're the ones who walk through it. What we carry with us, fear or hope, greed or generosity, division or unity, will shape the world that emerges on the other side. The ancients knew this. The prophets knew this. And now, so do we.